So we're going to be talking router spindle speeds. Slowing your router down will not stop burning. There's really only four things to know in routing: direction of cut, spindle speeds, feed rate, how fast you're moving the router and cutter and spindle and everything around your work in whatever fashion it is that you're doing. And then the last one is your depth of cut. Yeah, all these four kind of principles, ideas, techniques, rules, whatever you want to call them, apply. Every time you pick up a router and start butchering wood with it, you should be thinking about and understanding these four things. So all we're going to worry about today is our spindle speed. Yeah. Now, these bottom two, feed rate and depth of cut, are linked, so they will feature a separate video. So we're going to be running about purely motor RPM and spindle speed. Let's take a router cutter. How's about that? There we go. So this is, draw it. This is 1 inch diameter. Here's the flutes, and here's the kind of gullets. It's going to spin clockwise in the machine. If I take one of these cutting faces and just call it A, as it spins, it will travel at that tip a set distance. Yeah, so the distance it travels will be the length of its circumference. Yeah, so for 1 inch, which is the diameter, multiply that by pi. That's how you work out the circumference of a circle. It's pi times the diameter. Yeah, that will be 1 times 3.1415282, blah 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 blah, however many down to decimal, 2 decimal points. Yeah, so it will, this tip of this knife here, as it rotates once, it will travel 3.14 inches. Yeah, for every revolution that it makes. Yeah. Now, when we talk about router RPMs, we talk about revolutions per minute. Yeah, in tens of thousands. It doesn't matter if you are using a circular saw, a table saw, even a lathe, even a pillar drill or a drill press. Anything rotating, all the speeds are measured in rotations or revolutions per minute. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be sort of talking about here. So one revolution, if it turned one revolution every minute, it would travel 3.14 inches every minute. Yeah, well, with routers, because they're spinning really, really fast, generally, as a rule of thumb, and they can go faster, they'll go anything up to 28,000 RPM. Yeah. Now here's one of my router manuals, and in here is a little table. So on my variable speed router, I've got, hopefully you can see it, might be a bit small, let me just lift it up. You see just above there's a little bit on the top. Whoop. Just here where my finger is, it says 4, and I can change that to 3, 2, 1, or I can zip it up to 5. And if you've got a variable speed router, you'll have the same thing. It'll be a little dial. It might go from 1 to 6. It might go from A to E or F or whatever it is. But it'll have kind of 5 or 6 settings for its variable speed. Now in the manual, here, I've got a little table that says 1 equals 9,000 RPM, 2 is 13,000 RPM, 3 is 18, 4 is 23.5, and 5 is 27, all in thousands of RPM. So how fast actually is that? Because if you've watched my router bits video, you'll see in there that actually it states on the shank of most of my cutters, it will say N max. It'll be listed on the shank, and it'll say N max, and then it'll be a number. And so we're going to do the maths for 3.14 inches times 28,000 RPM. And if we do that, you might have already done it already. I did it in my head, not with a calculator, honest. And that comes out to 87,920 inches, because it's inches, that many inches per revolution, that many revolutions, that becomes inches per minute. Yeah, that's how far it would travel if you did it in a straight line. Now, if you stretch that kind of spiral out into a straight line from start to finish, once it done over 27,000 rotations, it would have travelled 87,920 inches. Now, because we know how many inches that is, we can convert our inches, because there are a set number of inches for every mile. And if we convert 87,920 inches into miles, we will get 1.3, and I've rounded quite heavily on this, 876 miles per minute. Yeah. So every minute, that little corner of that knife there, which is this edge on here, after 60 seconds, that will effectively have travelled 1.3876 miles. Yeah. So every hour, it will do 60 times that. So if we multiply 1.3876 miles by 60, we'll get 83.256 miles per hour. A smidge over 83 miles an hour. Just let that sink in for a second. That's speeding on the motorway in the UK. That's pretty quick. We'll bear that in mind. So we'll keep up with 83, but not all of our cutters are an inch in diameter. Yeah, and generally when people talk about router spindle speeds and variable speeds of routers, they bring out the big guns. Yeah, they bring out their huge panel raising cutters. The biggest I've got actually here in the workshop today, this large round over bit that was actually in the thumbnail, you might have noticed, which is about maybe 2 inches and change diameter. Have we got actual one-to-one sizes? So when you look at that's 2 inches, these bits are a little bit bigger, and actually the full diameter of it is 88.9 millimeters. So that's 3.5 inches in diameter. That's even bigger. But we'll stick with 3 inches because it makes the maths easier. Yeah. So that was our 1 inch diameter. We were doing 83.3, call it, miles per hour. Yeah. If we go up to 3 inches in diameter, we'll do the same maths. Yeah. So 3 times 3.14, which is our diameter multiplied by pi, yeah, which is 9.4. Feel free to follow on with the maths, by the way. If we keep this at 28,000 RPM, 9.42 times 28,000, yeah, so it's 9.42 inches to RPM, we'll get 263,760 inches per minute, which is our kind of rough speed. Yeah. 263,760 inches is the equivalent of 4.1629 miles. That's in per minute still, you see. But to get it in per hour, we multiply that by 60, gives us 249.774 miles per hour. Points here are travelling in excess of 250 miles an hour. Right? Now we can't change physics. Yeah, we can't physically change the size of this. That's fixed. It's metal. We can't change pi. Pi is a constant. Yeah, we've got no changing the diameter. The only part of this that we can change is our original spindle speed. Yeah, because if we drop that number, we drop this number, because if we multiply 9.42 inches by a smaller number than that, this will be less. So even if we drop that by half, we get that down to 130, call it 132,000, which is not far off our original number. Yeah, so we're dropping the speed by dropping the RPM. I hope so far that makes sense. Yeah, the only thing we've got control of physically as woodworkers, operators, tool operators, is our spindle speed. Yeah, and if you can understand the sort of the maths and the physics, and that's why I use 1 and 3 as the numbers, you can see how the speeds increase, where you can work out exactly what speeds we need to be used, and also where to find them, because you don't actually always need to, in fact, to be honest, you very rarely need to use maths, because there's so many places where those speeds are a given. Yeah, on the shank of these bits, and admittedly these are, or this is a 1/2 inch bit, you can see it actually says printed. Whoop, bring it up. Hopefully you can see that on the shank of the cutter, NMAX 28,000. Yeah, I genuinely hope you can see that. So the actual cutter is saying 28,000 RPM. Yeah. So, and this cutter, which is, as I can look at the cutter code, is printed on here as well, which is 45140. If I look this up in the table, on here is a table of the radius of the round over in metric and imperial, and then it's got the diameter in the second and the third column of the overall cutter. The diameter of this cutter is 32 millimeters, which is actually more than an inch. It's more like 1 1.25 inch diameter cutter. So these edges, I'll put it on that blank bit of paper. I'll use this cutter because you'll be able to see it a little bit better for this. So these outer edges on 1 1.25 inch diameter cutter are actually doing more than 80 miles an hour, according to our maths, because that's saying we can spin that 28,000 times a minute. You just saw the maths, it comes out at over 80 miles an hour. Boom. Yeah, and they're saying that that is safe, which is kind of cool. But where do we find how our machine translates to that spindle speed? It's in the instruction book. Boom. You still got the instruction book for your router? Haven't you? Should have. Remember I said it's not just about the speed. Yeah. There are other things afoot that we need to be aware of. And if I show you back on the catalogue, yeah, you should be able to see down here there are some little warning triangles with numbers underneath them. Yeah. Now the numbers, first of all, relate to spindle speeds. So this cutter, this 3/4 inch diameter, 3/4 inch radius round over bit, which is basically this one here, is 18,000. Well, that's 18,000 RPM. Yeah. As we go up to an inch, 7/8, an inch, and 1.25 inch radius, those numbers start to drop. So up to a 1 inch radius round over bit, we're talking 16,000 RPM. Get a little bit bigger, it goes down to 12,000 RPM, all the way up to 1.5 inch radius cutter, 12,000 RPM. Yeah. So as the cutter gets bigger, the spindle speed has to drop, and it has to drop, as we've already seen, to accommodate for these outer edges. That brings us onto these triangles, and they refer to what it says at the bottom of the page here. It says for stationary machines at recommended speeds as indicated. So stationary machines are talking about router tables. Panel raising bit, these all have the same triangles, you see. If we put this into a handheld machine and start moving the machine whilst it's spinning, we get a gyroscopic effect. You might have done it at school. You get a bike wheel and you hold the axle and somebody spins it, then you go to move the wheel and it will pull you around. Yeah? That's exactly what happens in a router that's not mounted in the machine. Horribly wrong, horribly quickly. So there's two factors about spindle speeds that you really should be aware of. First off is slow down those big cutters, and they don't have to be huge panel raising bits, they can just be large round over bits as well. Don't forget about that one. And put them in a table. Once they get to about 2 inches, put them in a table. That's not to say that you can't put little dinky bits. You can have these tiny little 1/8 of an inch round over bits just for taking tiny chunks. They'll go in a route table just as easy as well. But if you're using large bits, you don't want those doing their own thing and spinning around. Yep. Your machine, your router machine, through whatever manufacturer it is, should have in its manual tabulated speed 1 equals, in my case, 9,000 RPM. Speed 5 equals, 27,000 RPM. It might be A to E. Like I said, it could be, I know I used to have a Ryobi router years ago, and that was lettered A to E. A was slow and E was fast. So it depends on your machine. That's going to be specific. The speed at which you want to be spinning that cutter will be on, hopefully, if you're buying router bits, certainly in the UK, and certainly now, and they're from the UK, and they are legit for the UK market, because, you know, let's face it, we can all go on the internet and buy anything. They should have on the shank of those cutters, they should be printed not just the cutter, the manufacturer, when, and all that kind of stuff, but it should have that RPM NMAX. Yeah. Now, one thing I'm going to say, dispel a huge myth here, and I'm going to out and out say it because there's no beating around the bush. Slowing your router down will not stop burning. Ain't gonna happen. Now, nope, not gonna do it. The way you stop your router bit burning your work is actually to increase your feed rate. Yeah, and the way you increase your feed rate is to reduce the amount of resistance that work is producing. And the way you do that is you reduce the amount of work that you're cutting. Yeah. So with a router, generally it's reduce your depth of cut. But we'll cover that in a second. That's why I said right at the start, if you remember, depth of cut and feed rate were explicitly linked. Now, Jamie's in the chat. Jamie does a lot of wood turning. If you don't follow Jamie Page, JP Woodwork, then you're interested in wood turning, go and give him a look out. Wayne was certainly in the chat. So Wayne the wood turner, you are both in the chat. So I'm going to put this question to you. When you are turning spindles, how do you get the finest finish possible when you're doing your last cuts? What do you do? Now, I'm kind of hoping that you say you increase the spindle speed. Yeah, when you get, like with a skew chisel, if you want to get a real fine cut, a light pass, a light cut with your lathe, put the spindle speed up, or the lathe speed, lathe RPM, you get a finer cut. Yeah. With a router, it is exactly the same. If you increase your router RPM, you will get a finer cut. Yeah. If you have 2 sticks and you rub them together, you can set fire to them. Yeah, that's how cavemen started fire. So being as my router will spin its slowest possible speed, 9,000 RPM, yeah, even with a small cutter, we could get that easily down to maybe 20 miles an hour. Yeah, if I put a dowel in a drill that only goes 3,000 or 4,000 RPM, I can still blacken that and burn that, can't I? So because of the speeds we're talking about, they're way up in the fast speeds. There's no way you're going to get it slow enough. So that's not the thing. Keep the speed up, the spindle speed, the router RPM, spindle speed, high to get a better finish, a more efficient finish. Yeah, but keep it down dependent on the size of your cutter. That's where the kind of the jiggle goes, and that is why people kind of go, the sweet spot is, you know, generally a little bit slower than the, you know, slightly less than, yeah, maybe, but also that's an analog dial. I can't get it super accurate, so they're kind of roughish numbers in real world terms anyway, aren't they? So, you know, the 5 and the 4, they're not going to be that. It's not like it's a digital input or computer speed controller. It's like a bit of copper on a spindle. It's like a variable resistor, basically. So you've got to keep these things in perspective as well. Yeah. Right. So not only have we got with the larger bits our warning triangle for stationary machines, we've also got our spindle speeds. Yeah. Not only have the cutters on the shank of them got the spindle speeds listed, because sometimes in some territories that don't, or if you're using old bits, I've got loads of cutters which have got no information on the shank other than where I got it from. It came in a set. It doesn't actually list those spindle speeds or anything on there, but if you look at the packaging, 51 to 67, 16,000 RPM, 68 to 86, 12,000 RPM. So this one doesn't say the very small, because this packaging is for the larger cutters. If I take a small packaging on here, it's basically the same, but it covers those smaller diameters. So that's saying 1 millimeter to 24 millimeters, 28,000 RPM, 25 to 30 millimeters, 24,000 RPM. So actually these two bits of packaging cover every cutter from 1 millimeter up to 86 millimeters, which is pretty much the extent of Trend's range of cutters, go from 1 millimeter diameter up to the tiniest of straight bits to the biggestest of panel bits. 28,000 down to 12,000. Yeah, and that doesn't matter what manufacturer it is, because, you know, physics, baby, as we said before, spindle speeds and what kind of spindle speeds. As long as you've got either that table that we just saw and the manual for your machine, you can pick the best. The next thing to do once you've picked that is try it against the wood, and if you're getting a good result, go with it. Once the machine's set for spindle speed, that's kind of that adjustment really done. There's not really much you need to do with that. The rest of it, like I said before, is your depth of cut and then your feed rate. And generally it's your feed rate which will tell you if you're doing it right or not. You know, if you're going a bit slow or it's sounding like it's straining it, that's when you're cutting too much. You need to back out. If you cut a little bit, cut a bit less. Generally, if the machine's squealing but you're not burning, you can back it off and you'll cut faster. Or if it's squealing and then it's too slow because it's the wood or the material's putting up too much resistance, then you can back off and you can increase your feed rate, get a better cut, no burning, and again, you haven't changed the spindle speed at all.